General George S. Patton's forces race across France in one of the greatest advances in military history. But exhilaration turns into frustration as they near the German border. Supply problems cripple Patton's advance. Heavy rains turn roads into swamps. And the retreating Germans suddenly launch deadly counterattacks. Mistakes are made, but heroes emerge in some of the fiercest tank battles of World War II. General George S. Patton. His bold attacks are legendary. See the war as he saw it, and ride along with his hard-fighting troops as they battle their way through World War II. On this 360-degree battlefield, Patton's enemies could be anywhere and everywhere. There's nowhere to run when the war is all around. Patton 360, on Hitler's doorstep. September 1944. Following General George Patton's historic race across France and the Soviets' continuing gains on the Eastern Front, the Allies are beginning to squeeze Hitler like a vice. The Fuhrer desperately wants to change the momentum. September 8th, 3 a.m. Outside the town of Mary, France. In the middle of the night, a column of tanks and other vehicles moves down a small, lightly wooded country road. Corporal Don Knapp of Whitman, Massachusetts, is a tank commander in the 712th Tank Battalion. It's his night to keep watch. He's trying to figure out if the vehicle sounds in the darkness are friend or foe.
And then they get abreast, and there's some trucks going by, and a German sitting on the tailgate talking, and I could hear him. You know, that's close. So I got out quietly. We weren't visible because, you know, we were sort of camouflaged in the trees.
Knapp goes to alert his company commander, but before the rest of the company can be woken, the German 106th Panzer Brigade moves past. Then, 200 yards away, the German column stumbles right into the 90th Infantry Division's headquarters and artillery units.
For the enemy to suddenly launch a thrust that places him within reach of your divisional headquarters and divisional artillery is very, very bad news.
A Sherman tank assigned to protect HQ nails a German half-track at the end of the column. The Panzer Brigade suddenly realizes it's in the middle of an American camp. German and American tanks blast away, then scatter in the darkness.
No matter how well you prepare, sometimes you're just caught off guard. I mean, the Americans were completely surprised, but they regrouped, and then they took care of business.
The next morning, Knapp and two other Shermans find a protected spot near a road. Only their barrels are visible. And they don't have to wait long for a target to approach.
All by itself, we see a Panther coming down, slowly. So we threw everything out of it. We caught him down by the bogey wheels in the back. Big explosion and a big black smoking ring come up.
By the end of the day, Patton's troops have decimated the Panzer Brigade, knocking out 21 German tanks and tank destroyers, 60 half-tracks, over 100 support vehicles, and taken 764 prisoners. But on this same day, September 8th, General Patton is frustrated beyond belief, not with his troops, but with his bosses. The resentment has been building for days. Flashback. 8 days earlier, August 31st, 1944. Patton's Third Army has just completed an unprecedented sweep across France.
In August, he swept through, got to the Seine River, crossed the Seine River, continued moving, advances all the way to eastern France. And then he stops. General Patton is forced to do something that is completely and utterly counter to his nature.
Gasoline deliveries to Patton's Third Army have suddenly fallen from about 400,000 gallons a day to almost nothing. Patton is stuck in the Lorraine region of France, only 60 miles from the fortified Siegfried Line at the German border. He wants to thrust into Germany towards Frankfurt.
And he can't because he doesn't have the gasoline to fill up the vehicles, to move the tanks, the half-tracks, the jeeps, the tank destroyers, and all of the other vehicles forward.
Supreme Allied Commander General Dwight Eisenhower has given the fuel priority to Patton's rival, British Field Marshal Bernard Montgomery, who's trying to advance with other Allied forces across Belgium and Holland.
Patton becomes so frustrated at the situation, he basically says, if Eisenhower would just stop holding Montgomery's hand and give me the supplies I need, I could go through the Siegfried Line like through a goose.
Now, Patton and his men are stuck west of the Moselle River, only able to fight local battles.
The Allied pause in September is a godsend to the German army. At this point in the war, the Germans are feeling defeated. They're basically walking back into Germany. The pause gives the Germans time to regroup and meet whatever the Allies are going to dish out.
During Germany's disastrous summer, Hitler fired his top general in the West, Gerd von Rundstedt. The Fuhrer was also slightly wounded during an assassination attempt. But on September 1st, Hitler reinstates the well-respected von Rundstedt. Stability is returning to the German ranks.
Von Rundstedt is basically your quintessential caricature of what a German or Prussian general would look like. He's ramrod straight, he wears the old Prussian helmet with the spike coming out of the top. He's one of the most experienced generals in World War II.
The Germans don't know that Patton's hands are tied. But Patton wants to keep taking any small steps forward that he can. So on September 8th, units of the 20th Corps, under the command of Major General Walton Walker, attempt to move east at Dorno. Target, the Moselle River. Strategy, advance past the Moselle, break the Lorraine stalemate, and take the war into Germany. Tactics, an amphibious assault by the 5th Infantry Division to secure a bridgehead, establish pontoons, and then bring armor across on portable bridges. Weeks earlier, Kelly Lemon kept his unit moving when he swam across a river under enemy fire and brought rowboats back when assault boats weren't available. But at Dorno, things don't go well from the start.
Found myself in a dogfight with a brigadier general from the 7th Armored Division who claimed he was supposed to cross there.
Lemon's men were supposed to cross in assault boats under the cover of darkness on September 7th. Now, due to the traffic jam, the element of surprise is completely gone. As they cross in midday on the 8th, German artillery pounds Dorno as heavy rain begins to fall. The assault boats don't offer much protection. The M1 assault boat is made of plywood. The 16-foot-long boat weighs only 300 pounds. It can carry 9 soldiers across at a time, and the crew of 3 engineers then paddles back to pick up another squad. 24-year-old Private First Class Andy McGlynn of Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania, is in one of the 5 boats crossing the Moselle.
We got our boats and started crossing under some small arms fire. The fella 2 ahead of me in my boat was killed. Never made a sound. It was when we got to the other side of the river and unloaded, he never moved. He just stayed there.
German artillery takes out 2 of the boats. But somehow the rest of the battalion makes it across. Surprisingly, when the soldiers move inland, there is little resistance. They are now closer to Germany than anyone else on the Western Front. Their objectives are 2 hilltop forts. But when they see the rows of barbed wire and the thickness of these subterranean strongholds, it becomes clear they will need help.
And then we really got hit. And then we were told, pull back to the river. One fellow was hit right behind me, right through the helmet, never made a sound. Just, he died instantly.
McGlynn and the other survivors retreat to a wooded area next to the river. They set up a horseshoe-shaped defensive perimeter within the trees. It will become known as Horseshoe Wood. Back across the Moselle, half a mile to the west, Colonel Lemon wants to get across the river to join his men. But German artillery suddenly changes that plan when a shell strikes his jeep.
The executive officer, the intelligence officer, a couple of key enlisted men, and my radio operator was killed. So I went to a house in Dornot that had been fitted with wire communication to the rear, and reestablished the command post there.
Lemon requests the heavily outnumbered soldiers be allowed to withdraw back across the river that night. But his commanders have other plans. They're trying to open another crossing a few miles to the south and need to keep the enemy near Dorno distracted. The request to withdraw is denied.
One of the most difficult things I ever did in my life was to inform the troops that they'd become expendable, that I had just received orders that they were to hold at all costs. That really gets your attention.
The only thing Lemon can do now is pray that his entire battalion won't be wiped out trying to hold Horseshoe Wood. In August 1944, General Patton's troops often chewed up 50 miles a day as they pursued the retreating Germans across France. But now, in early September, Patton's historic advance has ground to a halt.
It had to have been an incredibly frustrating situation for General Patton in late August, early September of 1944, when fuel resources were taken away from Third Army and then given to Field Marshal Montgomery, one of Patton's chief rivals, a person against which Patton often clashed, going back all the way to Sicily.
Now the Germans facing Patton's men have regrouped along the Moselle River, but old Blood and Guts is slow to adjust to the new situation. In a letter to his wife Beatrice, he writes, "I am doing my damnedest to get going again, but it is hard. Once people stop, they get cautious and the enemy gets set. Books will someday be written on that pause which did not refresh anyone but the Germans."
Patton's strategy in crossing the Moselle River is basically to regain the momentum he lost during the pause in September and cross the river basically on the run. This does not work because of the terrain. His armor and infantry are not able to support each other. There are several crossings that the Germans cut off. They're quite bloody.
September 8th, 1944. The 2nd Battalion of the 5th Infantry Division's 11th Regiment is in the middle of one of those bloody crossings. The soldiers are trying to hold on to their small bridgehead across the Moselle at Dorno. There's no chance of escape until another crossing is made further south.
That was the worst we had ever been in, from Normandy all the way through. We had never been in a point where we were trapped and had to suffer tanks and artillery and everything else.
American artillery across the river joins in lobbing shells to try and hold the Germans back. Finally, on the night of September 10th, the crossing to the south is established. The desperate remaining soldiers at Dorno are allowed to retreat back across the river for a much-needed break.
They're passing out bottles of cognac. So I got a bottle and I found my buddy Sam and helped finish that cognac. The casualties in that thing across the river for the battalion was 80%.
You don't have to be charging forward to be a hero. Holding the bridgehead against all odds, fighting, clawing, taking it to the enemy while you're sitting in a defensive position, those are real heroes in my book.
By September 10th, Patton's Third Army finally receives enough gasoline to make a larger advance. He can see that Walton Walker and his corps are going to have a tough time moving forward. The fortified city of Metz has repelled attacks for centuries. 35 miles south of Metz, near the city of Nancy, looks like a softer target. But two of Patton's generals disagree about how Nancy should be taken. In command of the battle-hardened 4th Armored Division is General John Wood, an aggressive, larger-than-life character known to his men as Tiger Jack. His boss is General Manton-Eddy, a friend of Eisenhower's who served with Patton in North Africa and Sicily. But Eddy has only been overseeing Wood in the Third Army since mid-August.
Wood sees an opportunity north of Nancy where there's only one river and he can advance rapidly and cut off Nancy. Eddy, the infantryman, wants to go south where he thinks resistance is a bit thinner, but there's a number of bridges. And infantrymen can cross rivers a lot easier than an armored division, obviously.
This is not the first time Wood and Eddy have clashed, and it won't be the last. But Eddy finally agrees to a compromise and allows Wood to send half his armored forces around Nancy to the north, while the rest of the division will attack from the south. But at the same time, Hitler is preparing his own offensive. Against the advice of General Rundstedt, Hitler orders a major counterattack against Old Blood and Guts. Hitler calls in one of the most gifted officers of the Third Reich from the Eastern Front to lead the assault, General Hassel von Manteuffel. At 5'2", his lack of height has never held him back.
Hassel von Manteuffel was one of Germany's most decorated officers. He was one of only 27 recipients of the Knight's Cross with oak leaves, swords, and diamonds, highest decoration Germany could possibly give. He was also one of Germany's greatest battlefield commanders.
Hitler wants Manteuffel to flank Patton's entire army.
Hitler envisions a massive counterattack being thrust through Lorraine into the heart of the United States Third Army that would drive out of Lorraine, drive on to the ancient French city of Reims.
But before the assault can kick off, Patton makes the opening move at Nancy. For now, Hitler's strategy has been put on hold. September 11th. The battle for Nancy gets off to a rough start to the south at the village of Bayonne, as the riflemen of the 35th Infantry Division attempt to establish a bridgehead across the Moselle for the tanks of the 4th Armored. They encounter heavy firepower from the enemy's shore. Alvin Erzik, a native of Salem, Massachusetts, and an officer in the 8th Tank Battalion, knows that 3rd Army must make some progress soon. If they don't, Montgomery and the British will get their fuel again.
And for the infantry to cross the river, for the engineers to come up and install a bridge would take 2 or 3 days. And we tankers said, there must be something we can do. So I led the forces along a canal to the north.
When his unit takes a position overlooking the Moselle, Erzik spots what he thinks might be their ticket across. Below them, the Moselle has splintered, broken up by fingers of land. The first of the Iron Beasts enters the swift current of the Moselle.
And it get going down deeper and deeper. Finally, it got to the point where the river is swirling around the tank. So when he got there, he gunned the tank till he finally got across the Moselle River.
One by one, the tanks of the 8th Battalion make it across, gunning their engines at just the right moment to push over the banks and climb out of the river.
Now, mind you, this is a major river. This was totally unconventional.
Erzik and the determined tankers of the 8th Battalion have broken the stalemate south of Nancy. Patton finally has armor across the Moselle. But the fight for Nancy and the Moselle River is just getting started. Eastern France, September 13th, 1944. General George S. Patton's forces are fighting the German army for control of the Moselle River. Patton is still trying to grab back the momentum he lost when his gasoline supplies were taken away at the start of the month.
Those 5 days, really, at the beginning of September that the Germans gain, because Patton is just flat out of fuel, really gives the Germans an opportunity to develop defenses along the Moselle River.
In the north, Walker's 20th Corps has been pushed back at Dorno. But in the south, the tankers and riflemen of Mantonetti's 12th Corps are slowly taking ground south of Nancy. 12 miles north of Nancy, American engineers are hard at work at the town of Douloir.
The 80th Division reaches the river, and through the construction of a pontoon bridge, they're able to cross the Moselle on September 13th.
This is the break 4th Armored Division Commander Tiger Jack Wood has been waiting for. One of the first units to cross is the 4th Armored's 37th Tank Battalion, under the command of 30-year-old Lieutenant Colonel Creighton Abrams.
Creighton Abrams is a real hero in our Army because of his prowess on the battlefield, his charismatic leadership, his ability to train and prepare his unit for combat and then lead that unit in combat. As commander of the 37th Tank Battalion, he led from the front with a great deal of physical courage. He sensed opportunities and exploited them without hesitation.
General Creighton Abrams was not only a hero in World War II, but he was somebody who inspired an entire generation of tankers. It was fitting that we named the M1 Abrams tank after him.
Now, Abrams has his sights set on the goal of getting behind Nancy and cutting off the German-occupied city. General Wood's demand to attack Nancy from the north has paid off. In one day, Abrams' 37th Tank Battalion covers 15 miles. September 14th, 1944. The 4th Armored's Combat Command A has closed in on the vital town of Aracourt, on the main north-south road to the east of Nancy. From the south, Combat Command B, including Albin Erzik's 8th Tank Battalion, has fought its way northeast over 3 days, from Bayonne towards Mayex. The German forces in Nancy have been almost completely encircled. General Johann Blaskowitz has already ordered most of his troops to retreat toward the German border. Wood wants to race after them, but his boss, General Mantonetti, hesitates.
Mantonetti regularly had conflict with General John Wood, commanding 4th Armored Division, with the approach to and the capture of the city of Nancy. Wood was frequently wanting bolder action. Eddie was a bit more cautious.
So here, Nancy is taken, and he wants to pause for a number of days so he can tidy up his line. So Patton, wanting to show confidence in his commanders, and Eddie's reluctance to move forward combine to give another pause to the Germans and allow them to stiffen their resistance.
And Adolf Hitler is quick to make the most of Patton's mistake. After days of delay, the Führer's armored counterattack is about to begin. He wanted to strike deep into Allied territory before Patton took Nancy. But the German goal now is just to push Patton's forces back across the Moselle River. And Manteuffel knows even this won't be easy.
He knows that he has a limited amount of firepower, and he knows that the skies belong to the Allies. Yet, he's a German officer. He's going to follow orders.
September 18th, 1944. Manteuffel's assault begins. His target, Patton's forces along the Moselle and the town of Luneville, which the Nazis hoped to use as a base of operations for ongoing attacks against Patton's soldiers.
What they had were brand new Panther tanks, freshly minted out of the factories. These were Panther tanks mainly. These Panther tanks came out of the fog. There was a total surprise.
But Manteuffel's panzers encounter heavy resistance at Luneville by U.S. tank destroyers and artillery. Now the German commander is forced to change his plans. Manteuffel redirects his units to take on Patton's tankers at the town of Aricourt. Dawn. September 19th, 1944. The men of the 4th Armored's Combat Command A wake up to a French countryside covered in a thick layer of fog and a breakfast of German lead.
During the battle that develops, C Company 37th Tank Battalion knocks out 11 German Panthers, using the fog to mask their approach and to mask their position. They move quickly, they get around to the sides of the German Panthers, and they get in shots that disable and knock out the Panthers.
Then, at 8 a.m., Captain Bill Dwight leads a platoon of M18 tank destroyers on a seek and destroy mission. Joseph Bartow of Bethlehem, Pennsylvania, is a mechanic in the 704th Battalion, whose motto is seek, strike, destroy.
You'd go out and try to find the enemy, and then strike the enemy, because once you found them, you had to kill them, and then get the hell out of the way.
The M18 gun motor carriage, aka Hellcat, has an open turret and is operated by a 5-man crew. It's designed for rapid response and heavy firepower. The high-velocity 76mm main gun packs a greater punch than the Sherman's main gun, and its 9-cylinder engine makes the Hellcat the fastest piece of American armor with a top speed of 50 miles per hour.
When they were in any kind of a fight, they brought us up in there because our guns could knock them out.
Dwight's Hellcat platoon creeps through the fog and takes a position behind a low rise. 150 yards away, German tanks enter the crosshairs. In a matter of minutes, the M18s knock out 7 German tanks. 3 of the Hellcats are destroyed, but Patton's gunners have forced the enemy column to fall back.
What they basically do is fire down on these German tanks and then back off the ridge so the Germans can't fire back, roll back up onto the ridge, fire another volley, and they keep this sort of back-forth attack going while they're holding the high ground.
That afternoon, 2 miles east of Aricourt, 37th Tank Battalion Commander Creighton Abrams forms a task force to search for enemy tanks. A Company joins James Leach's B Company. Leach is a South Carolina native who's already a veteran of the drive across France. It doesn't take Leach and his comrades long to find a good target in a valley.
They found this entire German tank company. They were all dismounted and they had a field kitchen there and they were eating supper. And we were on top of them first thing you know it. We went completely through the German position and occupied their position. 9 tanks were the result of the combined fires of A Company and my company.
The German assault on Aricourt is a complete disaster. Thinking that his tankers have exhausted the enemy, Patton finally allows Wood to resume his drive to the German border. But Manteuffel isn't finished yet. The Battle of Araucourt is far from over. September 19th, 1944. Patton's tankers in the 4th Armored Division have been in the fight of their lives near the French town of Araucourt. In the all-day slugfest, the combined firepower of Combat Command A has held back a major counterattack. And they've annihilated 50 enemy vehicles.
This wasn't all done without mishap. Many of our tanks got knocked out, got sick over it. Many of the boys that I knew, and we just had to forget about it, and that's all. This is war, and this is what we had to go through.
Now, on September 20th, Patton and the 4th Armored's commander, Tiger Jack Wood, think that yesterday's German attack is spent. And they can finally escape the stalemate of the Lorraine region. During one of the wettest Septembers on record, it's an area that Patton has come to hate, as he makes crystal clear in a cable to the War Department. He writes that, in the final settlement of the war, you insist that the Germans retain Lorraine, because I can imagine no greater burden than to be the owner of this nasty country. Patton and Wood have ordered Lieutenant Colonel Creighton Abrams to get back on the road and drive to the east, toward the German border at Sarreguemines. But German General Johann Blaskowitz knows that his supreme commander, Adolf Hitler, won't settle for a defeat. He's ordered General Hasso von Manteuffel to continue the assault, no matter what the cost.
Manteufel's in an impossible situation. This is why Hitler is regarded, and rightfully so, as not only a brutal and murderous dictator, but also an extremely ineffective commander-in-chief. He becomes very directive and says, continue to counterattack at this particular place. And it's a place where there was a very well-organized defense.
Now, 2 full panzer brigades move in through the woods outside of Araucourt and try to catch Combat Command A from behind. Manteuffel's forces outnumber Abrams 2-1.
When the Germans came out of the woodwork, they started shooting in our direction. I engaged them, held them at bay.
Leach sounds the alarm. Abrams immediately orders his 37th Tank Battalion to turn back and engage the enemy forces. Just south of Araucourt, the 155mm guns of the 191st Field Artillery use withering fire to hold back the panzers. While Leach and his platoon leaders attempt to size up the situation, a German tank moves into position and opens fire.
And it appeared to me he was shooting at my command tank. So I ran toward my tank, motioning him to back up. Back on, back up, back up. And he did. But suddenly he stopped, as if he was thinking, maybe the captain wants to get up on the tank. And the moment he stopped, the third round, 2 of them had missed him, the third round hit right in the right front of the tank. Cut the bow gunner in half and knocked the head off my driver. 2 very heroic young men had no idea what hit them.
While B Company attempts to rally, C Company is also hit hard and loses 5 Shermans in a matter of seconds. Facing a much larger German tank force, both American companies pull back behind the cover of a large ridge.
The Shermans are moving, they're maneuvering, they're placing fire on the enemy. By the time that the engagement finally breaks away and both sides pull away from one another, an equal number of tanks are knocked out on the battlefield, 11 Germans to 11 Shermans.
By the end of the day, Manteuffel's assault has stalled out. Blaskowitz's army has failed to shove Patton's armor back across the Moselle. Hitler is enraged. On the 21st, the Nazi dictator retaliates by firing Blaskowitz. The fighting outside of Aricourt rages on for days as the men of the 4th Armored hold off repeated panzer assaults. And for Manteuffel's panzer forces, it just keeps getting worse. In the skies above, P-47 Thunderbolts use occasional breaks in the dreary weather to slam the enemy armor.
Now you've got the P-47s diving in, the Shermans are kicking butt. Germans are in big trouble now. That's a real 1-2 punch.
But still, the Nazi high command insists on repeated armor assaults on Patton's forces throughout the region. Hitler is hell-bent on driving Patton out of Lorraine. Dawn, September 24th, 1944. Albin Erzik and the men of the 8th Tank Battalion are on a ridge 19 miles northeast of Nancy. Suddenly, the forest in front of them roars to life.
Out of the mist and the fog, we looked up, and this force, large, massive force, is moving out of the woods toward us. There are infantry on the ground. They had mostly Panther tanks with 2 or 3 Tigers amongst them, and they're advancing.
Erzik's tankers know they're no match for the German armor in a face-to-face shootout. One of the Americans facing the attack is Frank Dudash of Crown Point, Indiana.
We never would attack one-on-one. We'd attack 2-on-1. We'd get behind and put around in their engine compartment because that's where the thinnest part of armor's on any armored vehicle.
Erzik's men use the same tactics as their comrades up at Aricourt.
We were looking down at them. They're on the flat ground coming toward us. So we'd get 2 or 3 or 4 shots off before the Panther or the Tiger could get a shot at us. So the tanks would come up on the ridge and fire, bang, bang, bang. So we were knocking out quite a few of them.
The Panzers are quick to respond. The enemy tanks unleash a deadly barrage of 75 and 88 millimeter fire.
The worst, most horrendous noise that I've ever heard in my life was when an 88 hits a ridge and goes ricocheting off. You talk about locomotives and roars of planes.
If Patton's tankers are going to survive this slugfest with the enemy, they're going to need help. September 24th, 1944. For nearly a week, German General Hasso von Manteuffel's panzer brigades have been doing all they can to dislodge General George S. Patton's Third Army from its foothold east of the Moselle River. Patton's army has been countering each move that Manteufel makes, but the Germans aren't showing any signs of letting up. Near the town of Chateau Saline, Albin Erzik's battalion is facing a heavy assault by German armor. If Erzik and his men can't hold the line, the Germans could make a mad dash all the way to Nancy.
We were at a great disadvantage because the Tiger and the Panther had better guns head-on than we did.
Heavy cloud cover has kept American aircraft from joining the action.
The fog is heavy. It's raining. They were flying over but this cloud cover was so thick that they couldn't come down.
Just when it looks like Ersik's unit will be overrun, the cloud cover begins to break.
There was a little hole of blue opened up in the sky, and the hole kept getting bigger and bigger, and then all of a sudden it was big enough for our fighter support to come down.
They come so low and it would be scary because they would drop the bomb in the air behind you. It looked like it was coming right at you, you know. And then, of course, it would sail over your head, go right into the target.
"23 Panzers have been destroyed, 300 soldiers have been killed, and 194 have been captured. The Nazis' attempt to break through to Nancy has failed."
Hitler wants to keep pressing the attack, but his commanders are sitting there thinking, with what? The whole counterattack is shot.
Following their historic offensive advance in August, Patton and his men have proven in September that they can be just as deadly in a defensive struggle. They've destroyed or damaged almost 500 German tanks and assault guns, plus another 150 armored vehicles in just 1 month of fighting in Lorraine. The Battle of Araucourt has become one of the largest tank battles of the war, and the place where the myth of German armored superiority has died.
Fantastic example of the American military, particularly U.S. Army Armored Forces, who have learned how to take what they have, the Sherman tank, which was certainly not the best tank of World War II, and make it deadly on the battlefield when you are facing the enemy that does have some of the best armored vehicles of the entire war.
Despite the victories on the battlefield, Patton's in for a major disappointment. Just as in early September, Patton doesn't have enough fuel to follow up his success on the battlefield. Eisenhower again diverts Patton's fuel to British Field Marshal Bernard Montgomery.
He gave Montgomery the fuel that he requested, and Montgomery launched this operation, which of course we know as Operation Market Garden. Operation Market Garden ultimately did not succeed.
Any opportunity to end the war before Christmas has just been lost. Instead, Patton is ordered to stop any plans for an advance east of Nancy and to dig in along the Moselle near Metz.
They're dealing with a deteriorating weather situation that's only going to get worse as the days tick by, and they're dealing with shortages of supplies. September is the critical month of the supply shortages of the Allied armies that are fighting in Europe.
But even though the rapid advance is over, the fighting rages on. Forced to settle in for a long and deadly siege near the battlefields where he fought in World War I, Patton will face a new challenge and yet another tough opponent in the month ahead. Nazi General Hermann Balck, Blaskowitz's replacement, is digging in for a last-ditch battle to keep Patton out of Germany. Soon on Patton 360, General Walton Walker's 20th Corps and the men of the 5th Infantry Division are about to take on Balck's defenses at Metz. And the heavy guns of a mysterious enemy stronghold known as Fort Driant. For Patton, it seems that Lorraine will continue to be a sea of mud and blood. General George S. Patton's 7th Army is blasting its way across the island of Sicily. Whoever controls the airfields of Sicily will control the Mediterranean. But Patton isn't just battling against German and Italian forces. He's also competing with British rival Bernard Montgomery. Patton wants the glory of victory in Sicily to belong to his forces, not the British. Now, Patton's 7th Army slams into some of Hitler's best warriors. But General Patton is about to make the biggest mistake of his career. General George S. Patton. His bold attacks are legendary. See the war as he saw it, and ride along with his hard-fighting troops as they battle their way through World War II. On this 360-degree battlefield, Patton's enemies could be anywhere and everywhere. There's nowhere to run when the war is all around. Patton 360, Rogue General. Sicily, July 31st, 1943. For 21 days, Patton's 7th Army has been fighting the Germans and Italians for control of the island in the first U.S. invasion of Europe. Patton heads the American forces, driving from the west. British troops are advancing from the southeast. The target, capture the port city of Messina before the Axis forces can evacuate to the Italian mainland. As the men of the 1st Infantry Division battle their way up the center of the island, they grind to a sudden halt before the mountaintop city called Troina and the German defenses known as the Etna Line.
It was hard country to fight in because all the hills and mountains, you know. So you'd have to take one hill after another.
Troina is the highest occupied point in Sicily. It sits astride one of the few decent roads going from west to east. The Americans have 2 highways, 117 on the coast, 120 which runs parallel to the coast, 10 or so miles inland. Those are really the only 2 roads that you can use to get to Messina.
In command of the 1st Infantry Division is Major General Terry Allen, a personal friend of Patton's. Allen is a battle-wise, hard-drinking veteran of the First World War, who led the Big Red One to victory in North Africa.
Allen was a real professional. He was also a very flamboyant, character. He and Patton were very close and had a great relationship. That relationship would wear over time.
Allen and Assistant Commander Teddy Roosevelt Jr., son of the famous rough-riding president, believe that the Germans will probably fall back and not defend the town in a senseless waste of human life. Allen is dead wrong. Medium tanks and M7 self-propelled artillery can only offer supporting fire from a distance. Allen will have to hit Troina the old-fashioned way, with infantry. Allen selects the men of the 39th Regimental Combat Team, a unit on loan from the 9th Division, to lead the frontal attack.
Troina is a hornet's nest. The Germans, from their position on the high ground, can use their 75mm guns and all their machine guns to just cut the Americans to pieces.
Among the enemy guns pointed at Patton's troops is the versatile PaK-40. Designed in 1939, the PaK-40 75mm is a workhorse of German artillery. With a rate of fire of 14 rounds per minute and an effective range of 1,969 yards, the PaK-40 can launch a 15-pound shell that's capable of penetrating armor at 1,640 feet.
If you put a PaK-40 in the right position, it could dominate a valley, it could dominate a road. So if you put that one gun with a good crew, a well-trained crew with enough ammunition in a place, you could stop movement up the narrow roads in Sicily for a very long time.
But even more deadly than the well-aimed 75s are the fearsome German 88mm guns. A veteran of North Africa and the invasion of Sicily, Carl Peterson knows firsthand just how deadly the 88 is.
That was what we were scared of more than anything, because they could fire 3 rounds in a row. Bang, bang, bang. That was a mean weapon.
The American assault is forced to cut and run. Now, Allen brings up his own big guns, 105mm and 155mm howitzers. 2 miles away, U.S. gunfire tears the ridges and buildings of Troina to pieces. U.S. armor, in the form of the 62nd Field Artillery Battalion, join the fight. Serving in the 62nd is Florida native and North Africa veteran, Tiford Roebuck.
We probably fired as many shells trying to take Troina as we did at any one time in North Africa. You couldn't see the town sometimes for the smoke from the bombs and artillery shells.
As Allen watches the bombardment, Carl Peterson and his comrades from the 26th Infantry Regiment prepare for an all-out assault aimed at breaking the Etna line, where Axis forces have been digging in for weeks. Flashback. July 10th, 1943. General George S. Patton leads 90,000 American troops into battle on the island of Sicily. After fighting his way off the beachhead, Patton leads an armored charge across Sicily, crushing the Italian soldiers under the command of General Alfredo Guzzoni. In less than 2 weeks, he marches triumphantly into the city of Palermo. Patton's army has seized its first enemy capital.
They've cut the island in half. The Germans have been isolated. So what Patton's going to do is he's going to shoot for Messina.
Field Marshal Sir Harold Alexander, commander of all Allied ground troops, orders Patton and his rival, British General Bernard Montgomery, to capture the vital city of Messina on the far northeastern point of the island. Monty's 8th Army will fight its way north along the eastern coast, while Patton makes a 2-pronged assault from the west.
This is the pot of gold waiting for him at the end of this battle. He feels if he can get Messina, he can prove the fighting quality of his army to the equal, if not better, than the British.
Patton tells one division commander, this is a horse race in which the prestige of the U.S. Army is at stake. We must take Messina before the British. Patton's forces are split into 2 corps. The first, under General Lucian Truscott, will move down Highway 113 along the northern coast. The Second Corps, under General Omar Bradley, will head up Highway 120 through the center of the island. Target, Messina. Strategy: seize the enemy port and sea lanes, capture the Nazis before they escape to Italy, and beat the British to the finish line. Tactics: Patton's army will move in as 2 pincers, taking the Germans head-on. But unlike Patton's charge on Palermo, Messina will be no cakewalk.
The American troops traveling along the coast road have a mountain at their right and the Mediterranean at their left. The Germans realize this. They're going to blow bridges, they're going to destroy roads. They realize the American troops are being funneled into a very narrow battlefield, and they're going to take advantage of it as best they can.
The enemy forces are under the overall command of Field Marshal Albert Kesselring, who's already become an expert on how to bleed the American army. He's a deadly opponent for George S. Patton. From his headquarters in Italy, smiling Albert Kesselring plans a defensive strategy to buy time for a massive withdrawal. ordering Axis forces to dig defensive lines on the high ground, overlooking the vital highways. Kesselring intends to make Patton pay for every inch of ground taken in blood. The first defensive position is called the Etna Line. Running from the eastern shore of Sicily and around the base of the volcanic slopes of Mount Etna, the line stretches all the way to the Tyrrhenian Sea. But Patton is dead certain that his conquerors can break the Etna Line and beat the British. He tells his men, "You have, during 21 days of ceaseless battle and unremitting toil, killed and captured more than 87,000 soldiers. You are magnificent soldiers. You are closing for the kill. The end is certain and is very near. Messina is our next stop." Patton's drive on Messina begins in one of the Etna Line's toughest spots, the city of Troina. August 2nd, 1943. American artillery pummels the enemy high ground. Only miles away, U.S. shells rain in on the German positions.
Patton told them they had to get their artillery to fire as fast and effectively as possible. As many guns as you could muster on one target at one time. The effect is devastating.
But the Germans are so well entrenched that no amount of American firepower is enough to break them.
The way they were dug in, it just seemed like the more we would throw our artillery at them and the more that the bombers would bomb, it just seemed like we couldn't get rid of them.
Allen has vastly underestimated what's going to be required to take Troina. And he finally realized he's got to put the whole 1st Division, 20,000 soldiers plus, into this attack, trying to outflank the Germans, trying to get around Troina.
For the men of the 26th Infantry Regiment, the mission is to seize the high ground of Monte Basilio, 2 miles north of Troina, to help outflank the city.
It was early in the evening. As we were going up to the hill, the Germans were right in that area. In fact, they were so close, sometimes, you know, it'd be hand-to-hand going on.
As Carl Peterson and his comrades get pinned down on Monte Basilio, Patton and his generals suddenly realize that the road to Messina will be uphill slaughter all the way. Troina, Sicily, August 1943. For 5 days, American soldiers from Patton's 7th Army have been hammering the town with artillery, mortars, and rifles. Patton's GIs are on a race against their British allies in the 8th Army, trying to prevent a German evacuation from Messina to Italy.
What 7th Army is doing now is they're doing a sort of a 2-front offensive. One part of it is traveling along the North Coast Road. The other half of his army has got the tough fight. They're stuck at the Etna Line.
In his journal, Patton notes, "The mountains are the worst I've ever seen. It is a miracle that our men get through them, but we must keep up the steady pressure. We must beat the 8th Army to Messina."
There's a serious question about whether he was so obsessed with capturing Messina that he would risk anything to capture it. I wouldn't say Patton was reckless as much as he was obsessed.
From his command post, General Terry Allen and Omar Bradley watch as American gunfire tears the city to pieces. But so far, Allen has been unable to break the German defensive along the Etna Line.
Troina, like most Italian towns, is a lot of stone and masonry. It's very good for fighting defensively. It's an ugly thing. it goes on and on and on.
General Omar Bradley simply can't stand the hard-drinking Allen, a dislike going back to Tunisia. And as the battle for Troina drags on, Allen comes under intense pressure from both Bradley and Patton to get the job done. Right now, PFC Carl Peterson and the men of the 26th Regiment are in the fight of their lives on the critical high ground of Monte Basilio.
We didn't get very many supplies. They'd sneak one guy or two guys out to go back and get a pack full of ammunition and stuff, bring it up. That's the way we kept us going the best we could.
The GIs of the 26th, they're hell-bent on keeping the high ground, but they're running low on ammo, food, supplies, and the German machine gunners aren't making it any easier for them. For an infantryman, that's hell on earth.
By the morning of August 4th, Patton's men are so low on water and ammunition that it's only a matter of time before they're driven off the hill or wiped out. On the ridges above, German machine gunners have taken up new positions overlooking the American foxholes.
We were just trying to hang together. We were down on this ledge, and there was a German machine gun was over on the ridge, and they were just wiping our guys out really bad.
Finally, Peterson's comrade, PFC James Reese of Chester, Pennsylvania, decides that something must be done. He immediately leads Peterson and his squad into a position overlooking the German machine gun nest and opens fire with an M2 60mm mortar. The M2 mortar is a muzzle loading weapon that can accurately lob a 60mm explosive at an enemy target at 1,000 yards. Its overall weight is 42 pounds, and in extreme conditions can fire a maximum of 35 rounds per minute.
It was a very effective weapon for the infantry to use in providing indirect fire and providing infantry support for an attack in that kind of environment.
But Reese's mortar rounds are running low, and now Patton's GIs are facing a counterattack.
We didn't have much ammunition left, and we only had the one mortar down there. So Reese, he told everybody, including me, to get their butt out of there, you know.
Peterson refuses to leave Reese's side, and together they continue to engage the enemy until the German fire becomes unbearable.
Reese says, "Okay, Pete," he says, "get your butt out of here." And I only had a .45 pistol, and I couldn't shoot the guys down in the brush with that, so I figured, well, I better get out too.
On his own, Reese single-handedly fires the last of his ammunition. Reese is last seen pumping an 8-round clip of hot .30 caliber lead from his M1 at the enemy before a direct hit kills him instantly. Patton's troops managed to hold their position on Monte Basilio, and thanks to PFC James Reese, the machine guns that had been killing GIs only minutes before have been wiped out.
So that's what saved us, was him knocking off these extra people that were coming up.
For the heroic action that takes his life at Monte Basilio, PFC James Reese will be posthumously awarded the Medal of Honor. After a week of horrific combat, Patton's forces gained the upper hand at Troina.
Finally, with all the bombing and the artillery, it finally softened them up and the Germans started moving back.
Terry Allen's 1st Infantry Division has opened the way for Patton's drive on Messina, but it has come at a terrible price.
Troina is utterly smashed. It's been under air and artillery attack for almost a week now. There are lots of dead. German dead, Italian dead, American dead. It's one of the hardest fought battles of World War II.
Andrew Jacobson, a North Africa veteran, gets a first-hand look at the aftermath.
The people started coming back into the town. They were devastated by it, of course, but still, they weren't really ticked off at us. Well, even though we had destroyed the town, actually, but I believe that they figured the Germans caused it, you know.
In the wake of the epic debacle at Troina, Terry Allen and Teddy Roosevelt Jr. are relieved of command.
It was just like losing a member of the family, just like they'd been killed.
The myth that kind of comes out of this is that Patton fired them. That's not true. It was Omar Bradley, but for some reason it is always held that Patton is the responsible individual for the firing of Terry Allen. And the 1st Infantry Division will continuously hold Patton responsible for anything bad happening to the 1st Infantry Division.
20 miles north, Patton's advance along Highway 113 is slugging it out.
The Germans have the high ground. They can put observed artillery fire down. The Germans are becoming better and better at demolitions. So if you have a culvert, it's likely to have been packed with explosives.
As the casualties mount, no one feels the pressure for beating the British to Messina more than General Lucian Truscott, an ex-cavalryman who fought beside Patton in the invasion of North Africa. Truscott comes up with a bold plan to break the stalemate on the coast and outfight the Nazis. And it just might turn the tide of battle and help Patton win the race to Messina. Sicily, August 7th, 1943. For more than a week, General George Patton's army and their British allies have been on a desperate race to the city of Messina and the bragging rights to victory.
The image, of course, that Patton wants to portray is of an armored thrust. It's not going to be that way. It's going to be the 3rd Infantry Division charging along the coast.
General Lucian Truscott has been hitting the enemy hard. But a full frontal assault against the coastal town of San Fratello simply isn't enough to break the Nazis under the expert command of Albert Kesselring.
Truscott's going to have to figure out some other way of getting around them, or the Germans are just going to hold their ground till hell freezes over.
Truscott comes up with a new plan, a joint Army-Navy operation. He'll send his troops in on an amphibious assault behind the enemy position. If he can't break their lines, he'll just go around them. 9 p.m. Under cover of darkness, Allied vessels and landing craft move into position just offshore. Onboard destroyer USS Edison is Ensign Franklin Daly of Georgia.
We would have a small group of landing craft, and we would shepherd them to a point behind the enemy defenses, put them ashore, and then give them shore fire control support. We would be their artillery.
The assault takes the German defenders completely by surprise. 1,000 yards away, the German soldiers still manning their positions don't know what's hit them. And Patton's troops take over 1,000 prisoners. However, Axis commanders have already used the same cover of night to withdraw most of their troops to the city of Brolo and the high ground at Monte Cipolla. Nevertheless, the right flank of the Etna line has collapsed.
They've tested a new strategy, and it works to some degree. Although they have mixed results, they get ashore effectively. Patton likes this, and he wants to do it again, but this time at Brolo.
Once again, Patton's GIs and armored vehicles will make an amphibious end run behind enemy lines, with the firepower of Allied warships backing them up.
Truscott says, we're not ready for it. We need some more time to put it together. Patton doesn't care. He wants to go on the offensive. He needs to keep his army moving to keep it alive. Truscott, at one point, believes that Patton is doing this for the cameras and believes that Patton is doing this for his own prestige.
By now, most of Patton's generals and the GIs under his command are growing weary of old blood and guts. They believe that Patton's obsessive strategy has more to do with beating the British than it does with beating the Nazis. The men under Patton's command have already seen enough carnage on Sicily to fill a lifetime. They've been fighting and suffering for weeks in some of the worst terrain they've ever encountered. And tropical diseases like malaria are spreading through the ranks like wildfire. The simmering heat in Sicily is merciless. Most of Patton's men wear wool uniforms and carry a single aluminum canteen. Every day brings another batch of casualties taken out by exhaustion and fatigue.
U.S. Army soldiers today are in a far better position for fighting in extreme high temperatures than they were in 1943 during the Battle for Sicily. You'll see frequently the camelback, which is a device where you have a bladder that's mounted on your back with a siphon tube that comes up, and you can periodically just take it and take a mouthful of water out of the bladder that's being carried on your back. And that helps you hydrate and stay hydrated, especially in hot weather.
On an almost daily basis, Patton visits the field hospitals behind the lines. The tough-as-nails commander still has a soft spot for his wounded warriors. After one visit to the hospital, Patton wrote in his journal, one man had the top of his head blown off, and they were just waiting for him to die. He was a horrid, bloody mess and was not good to look at, or I might develop personal feelings about sending men into battle. That would be fatal for a general.
He has got to be that hardened soldier, the warrior that he's always wanted to be in order to get his men to do what he wants. Now, this philosophy and Patton's personal feelings can come in conflict from time to time.
For some, the nightmare in Sicily is simply too much.
Back then, a man that broke down was more or less looked upon as a coward. We had over the years several men that committed suicide. They just simply can't take but so much.
But for Patton, a veteran of campaigns in Mexico, World War I, and North Africa, anyone claiming to have battle fatigue is nothing more than a coward. The situation comes to a head when Patton makes one of his regular stops at a field hospital behind the lines on August 3rd.
And he went there to see his boys and to pay homage to those who'd been wounded, really. There is a soldier who doesn't quite fit with the others who are there wounded. In the first episode, his name was Charles Kuhl. He was a private first class from the 1st Infantry Division. He had a fever of 102 plus. He had malaria. He had chronic diarrhea. He had various other genuine ailments.
It's enough to pull him off the front lines. But when Kuhl tells Patton that his nerves are shot, the general suddenly explodes and slaps Kuhl in the face.
Patton completely lost his composure, accused him of cowardice, roaring, "I won't have a yellow coward defaming this place of valor with these fine wounded men."
And then he looks at Kuhl and yelled, "You hear me, you son of a bitch? You're going back to the front."
The key ingredient to anything Patton did was his leadership. And the key ingredient of his leadership was his ability to inspire soldiers to do things that many of them didn't think they could do. Sometimes he used the right method. Sometimes he chose the wrong method.
Only days later, Patton slaps an artilleryman in another hospital who claims to have battle fatigue. In a fit of rage, Patton reaches for his trademark Colt Peacemaker. A doctor restrains Patton before anyone gets hurt.
really abusing these soldiers in this way was one of the most disappointing things about his leadership in World War II.
News of Patton's violent attacks is kept under wraps. But the average soldier in Patton's army is reaching his limit.
By this point, the enlisted man's been driven hard. And now he's starting to think, hey, all this guy wants is the glory. He doesn't care about me. I mean, how the hell do you think he got the nickname Old Blood and Guts?
And now, General Patton is about to send these same battle-weary soldiers into yet another bloody hornet's nest at Brolo. Sicily, August 1943. The GIs of Patton's 7th Army are slugging it out with Nazi Field Marshal Albert Kesselring's forces on a race to the city of Messina. But the clock is ticking. The Allies must get to Messina before the Germans can escape to Italy. And Patton is hell-bent on beating his rival, British General Montgomery, to the finish line.
Lucian Truscott, commander of 3rd Infantry Division, performs a small amphibious landing along the northern coast of Sicily. It proves successful. It keeps the Germans guessing, it keeps them retreating. Patton sees this and wants to do another one at a town called Brolo.
It's a classic pincer move. While ground forces under the command of Lieutenant Colonel Lyle Bernard sneak ashore in the pre-dawn hours, General Lucian Truscott's 3rd Division and its tank columns will hit the Germans with a full frontal attack. 1 a.m., August 11th, 1943. Bernard's forces appear off the coast of Brolo and Monte Cipolla. They're escorted by 5 destroyers and light cruiser USS Philadelphia. While the assault forces go ashore with Bernard, the big guns of the fleet will cover their landings and will rake the German lines with heavy fire and clear the skies of Axis planes.
The landing at Brolo takes place at night. The intent is to get on top of a mountain that overlooks the road that comes along the coastline there. Things start to go wrong very quickly for this battalion.
As tanks get bogged down by the terrain, the sneak attack slows down. As each minute ticks by, Patton's soldiers are losing the element of surprise.
And you're just sitting there in the dark hours, watching the clock tick by, waiting. I mean, the tension's got to be unbelievable for these guys. And then the sun rises, and all hell breaks loose.
By 10:30 a.m., Bernard's sneak attack has failed. 1,000 yards away, cruiser Philadelphia and other American ships open fire, raking the enemy positions. Gunners' mates load and fire with everything they've got. But just as suddenly as she appears on the battlefield, the Philadelphia pulls out, fearing an enemy airstrike that could come out of anywhere.
We usually had a lot of forewarning for most of those attacks. But I can understand a ship like the Philadelphia being called away from one mission quickly if she had to defend herself against an aircraft attack.
The GIs are in the worst situation imaginable. They've moved into positions where they're covered by German fire, they're in the open, they can't advance. It's August in Sicily, they're scorching hot, and they have no water.
Under searing sunlight, Patton's troops do all they can to hold off the Germans at Brolo with small arms and machine guns.
It's like the child's game, rock, scissors, paper. If you have the rock of infantry landing, the paper that can cover that is the enemy fires and combined arms coming there. But what then you need is the scissors to cut that paper, which is naval gunfire.
Finally, at 5:45 p.m., USS Philadelphia comes back. In a matter of minutes, the cruiser hammers out more than 1,000 shells. But in the skies overhead, enemy bombers from Italy make a run on the Allied warships. While Philadelphia's main battery guns thunder away in support of the infantry, her 20 and 40 millimeter flak guns tear the skies. Philadelphia manages to fight off the air assault, but once again, the floating fortress pulls back.
Bernard's men are on their last legs. They're almost out of ammunition. The air attack has also destroyed the last of their artillery pieces. The Germans are attacking with even greater ferocity.
As night falls, small groups of American soldiers cluster together near the beaches, ready to make a last stand when the sun rises over the bloody Sicilian battlefield. Dawn, August 12, 1943. Battle-weary riflemen peer over the tops of foxholes, ready to greet another day of carnage at Brolo. But there is only silence. The enemy has simply disappeared.
Really, it's the appearance coming up the road of the main force of 3rd Infantry Division that causes the Germans to fall back. Bernard's force is saved, but there are substantial casualties, a couple hundred men.
But despite the costs, Patton's strategy of outflanking the enemy has worked. For the Nazis, Sicily is a lost cause. From his headquarters in Rome, Field Marshal Albert Kesselring plans the final evacuation of his entire army to mainland Italy. Thousands of enemy troops begin a fighting retreat, falling back and doing all they can to buy time to make their escape. August 14th, 1943. Patton's 7th Army is now almost within sight of their target, the port city of Messina. As Peter Havalli and the tankers of the 753rd Battalion move within miles of Messina, they get a close-up look at German firepower.
So we're moving in column. We reached the end of the road. It was an empty lot, maybe 50 feet wide, 100 feet deep. And once the first tank passed this empty lot, the Germans began to shell us.
Caught in the open, the American tank column is in danger of being cut to pieces on the deadly road to Messina. August 14th, 1943. Patton's 7th Army is only miles from the finish line, the port city of Messina, and victory in Sicily. His rival, British General Bernard Montgomery, is also moving in. The two Allied armies are nearly neck and neck. But right now, Peter Havalli and his comrades in the 753rd Tank Battalion are in danger of being destroyed by artillery as they move up a road in support of American infantry. Enemy guns still cover the approaches to Messina, buying time for the German retreat. Havalli's commander immediately orders the tankers to pull back and take cover behind a row of buildings and wait it out.
So we got in there, shooting the bull, going to find out what the hell we're going to do next. Then pretty soon a Jeep pulls up, and the guy comes out. Guess who? General Patton. So he looked at Lieutenant. He said, "What are you doing here?" He said, "Well," he said, "we're supposed to go and attack that area there." Well, he said, "Get your freaking ass out of here and go ahead and do it."
The tanks immediately take off, guns blazing. While Havalli drives the tank, he directs the fire of his gunner. The Stuarts spray lead at anything that moves.
I said, "Yeah, 10 o'clock, 10 o'clock, 10 o'clock." And he pointed the gun right away. He fired. He hit that sucker right in the middle. Boom, and just blew it up. And then we kept on going. A lot of vehicles burning flesh. It smells like crazy. A lot of dead Germans. From then on, the road was open, clear to Messina, with no problems.
Midnight, August 17th, 1943. Enemy ships run back and forth between Sicily and Italy, evacuating the cream of Albert Kesselring's army, just ahead of the arrival of American and British troops. Smiling Albert Kesselring's strategy of delay and retreat has paid off. Hours later, battle-weary GIs finally reached the outskirts of Messina, with orders to keep any British units from entering until Old Blood and Guts himself can march triumphantly into the city. Despite a fever of 103 degrees, Patton lays claim to Messina for the U.S. Army at 10 a.m. But victory is bittersweet.
Yeah, it's not an unvarnished triumph. The island is taken. For Patton, it's glorious, and yet he's got himself in the worst problem of his life.
Days earlier, Patton personally slapped 2 soldiers suffering from battle fatigue. At first, the story was kept under wraps. But when the news of the incidents reaches the press, the public outcry is enormous.
Eisenhower wrote a scorching letter to Patton saying, "Nothing has given me more pain in my military career than this. I have to question your fitness for high command."
Eisenhower, the Supreme Allied Commander, orders Patton to apologize to the 2 soldiers he slapped. But Patton takes it a step further, apologizing to every division under his command.
That wasn't good enough for me. That didn't satisfy me. I didn't like him before he slapped him, but that just did it with me. He had no right to put his hands on those boys.
He's won the biggest victory the U.S. Army has seen so far in the European theater. His 7th Army has not lost a battle, yet because of the slapping of 2 soldiers, Patton is now going to go into exile. He's going to pay for what he did.
Though the American and British armies have won a valuable base of operations in Europe, victory in Sicily has come at a terrible price. In 38 days of battle, Patton's 7th Army has suffered the loss of 2,237 killed in action and another 6,500 wounded. Overall, the Allies have lost 24,000 men to combat, wounds, and disease.
Sicily's been characterized as a bitter victory because while it achieved the objective of defeating the German forces on the island of Sicily, the German forces were in large measure able to escape intact. And these are the same forces, these very well-trained, well-equipped divisions that U.S. forces would have to face in Italy.
While Patton waits in exile, most of his combat soldiers head into battle under other generals. Peter Havale and Tiford Roebuck will go on to Italy, where they'll once again face Smiling Albert Kesselring. Carl Peterson, Andrew Jacobson, and the men of the 1st Infantry Division go to England, where, along with thousands of other American soldiers, they prepare for the Normandy invasion. For now, all that Patton can do is hope for vindication and pray for another chance to close with the enemy. That November, Patton writes in his journal, "My command has so far disposed of 177,000 Germans, Italians, and French, killed, wounded, and prisoner. It would be a national calamity to lose an army commander with such a record."
He's afraid that if he loses this command, he'll never be in the war again. He'll never get another shot at the enemy.
Soon, on Patton 360, the Allies will launch the massive campaign to liberate Europe and attempt to crush Adolf Hitler's Third Reich. And while the war rages on, General Patton will face the greatest challenge of his life, the battle to save his career and his destiny.